May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God. Amen. I start with a poem called I'm Hanging On by Farrah Tucker. I'm hanging on by a thread, and so are you, and him, and her, and them. But what if we tied our threads together? What if we stitched something strong enough to withstand the weight of it all, of us all? Big enough to make sure there's always a place to hold on to, even when parts of the fabric are threadbare. I'm hanging on by a thread, but I'm trying to learn how to weave. I've been hanging on to these words in my heart this week, at the same time as I've been reflecting on our reading from Acts. I've been thinking about how the fabric of community is woven in my own life. There's a quilt on our bed at home. My spouse Craig and I chose the fabric ourselves at a little shop called the Quilt Peddler in Fenimore, Wisconsin. It was months before our wedding, and we spent our time choosing colors and designs for the quilt that was to be. My mother-in-law, Donna, then spent the next weeks measuring, cutting, working on our sewing machine to stitch it all together. When that last stitch was placed, it wasn't complete yet, though. When we celebrated our marriage with a ceremony at Mayflower UCC in Minneapolis on August 29th, 2015, that quilt became our guest book. All over that quilt, people from various parts of our lives took fabric pens, chose a swath of empty space, and wrote their names, sometimes with additional words of blessing or love. On that quilt, their signatures bore witness to the literal fabric of our community. That is, the people who make it and the love that weaves us all together. And in the wedding ceremony itself, after our vows and the blessing of our rings, as they sang, "Love is flowing from the fountain of life," our community present there with us came forward to surround us and put that quilt over our shoulders with the blessing of their hands. Some more names have been added since, and the quilt has gone with us wherever we've moved since then. It covers our bed at home. It covers us as a constant reminder of the people who have made up the fabric of our community. This weaving of community can be a powerful way of understanding what is happening in our reading from Acts. The community of believers was of one heart, one mind, and one heart. None of them claimed anything as their own. Rather, everything was held in common. Nor was anyone needy among them, for those who owned property or houses would sell them and give the money to the apostles. Our reading today could offer itself toward the makings of a great stewardship message, with the emphasis that is placed on giving in the story. We give, and therefore we testify to the great power of our faith. All of this is true. But also, as Dr. Willie James Jennings comments, the church has often been led to focus on the spectacular giving that is described here, to such a degree that we can too easily miss something else essential happening here. Not the spectacular giving alone, but also the spectacular joining that makes such a gift exchange possible. I get goosebumps every time I read these words of Acts, every time I take even a few moments to contemplate what this kind of community might make possible in our world today, if such a community were even possible. It's easy to hear Acts and be both inspired and also doubtful. This vision of community sounds beautiful, but how could it ever actually be sustained? It sounds so ideal, like a utopia. But as Craig reminded me, utopia literally means no place. That's hard for me to hear, but when I think about it some more, it's also kind of a relief. Nowhere is there perfect community. There is also no such thing as a perfect quilt. The fabric of community we weave together will always have its imperfections, loose threads, holes and tears, lines that are not straight, and so on. Quilting in practice testifies to the truth that, like the quilt, the fabric of community will most often be kind of a patchwork, composed of many shaped pieces, different colors, diverse textures, and points of asymmetry. Community, like a quilt, is a product of necessity. In other words, we use the materials we have on hand. We make use of what is available to us. We give and find purpose in relationship to the people who show up in our day-to-day lives. In the past almost 3 years since my daughter Ruth was born, Craig and I have been especially intentional in trying to lean into our own vision and version of this community as much as we can. So we have weekly Monday night meals with 2 other families. We're part of a nanny share where we each pay a percentage based on our family's income. We are frequent givers and recipients of our neighborhood Buy Nothing group. If you don't know what this is and you're on Facebook, you should look for your Buy Nothing group. We have chosen family who transports the kiddos on Friday to childcare and school, and we are learning to ask for help when we need it. It is messy, complicated, and can be frustrating. But for us, it is a glimpse into the kind of community that Acts is calling us toward. The community, as described in Acts, didn't have to manufacture what it already had. It wasn't a utopia or a perfect community, as much as it was a spectacular joining. That's kind of the point, or a point of the story, that the community in Acts came together not because they had everything they possibly could have, but because they shared in common whatever they did have. They were an Easter community. They were a community joined together by the story of resurrection. Theirs was not a denial of death or limitations, but they were weaving a common life in the midst of and out of these very things. So again, I said this at the beginning, but as the director of Mental Health Connect, we have 34 faith communities working on education and stigma reduction around mental health, and our navigation line helps people get to the resources and support that they need. So the work of Mental Health Connect is also about making already available resources more accessible to those who need them. At Mental Health Connect, I think we are embodying the community of Acts today. If Acts gives us a model of faith, then we can say that faith is that which connects resource to need. The practice of faith is the work of spectacular joining. We ourselves, all of us, our bodies, our hearts, and minds are the fabric of community. We are not made of perfect cloth, but together we are whole, all of us connected, all of us necessary, all of us beloved. Regardless of our mental health or our mental illness, regardless of those stops and starts, those knots and snarls, regardless of what we have to share or what we need to live more healthy and meaningful lives, we are together children of God, woven and rewoven by the power of resurrection. At times, we may feel like we're hanging on by a thread, or our lives may at times feel threadbare, but we are also always held by something bigger, a power big enough to make sure there's always a place for each of us in the sacred fabric of community. Thanks be to God. Amen.